Jake Martinez stood at the large window of Haven's Rest space station and watched the alien ships arrive. The massive station floated quietly between human space and the territories of other species. For 3 months, diplomats from across the galaxy had been coming here to talk about peace and trade. Today was different, though. Today, the Velthari Empire was sending their most important delegation yet. The human diplomatic team had been preparing for weeks. Dr. Lisa Parker spent her days reading every report about Velthari culture. Commander Maya Singh checked security protocols over and over. Jake himself had been studying their language and customs, while also making sure all the station systems could support their unique needs. Jake was 28 years old and worked as a cultural liaison. Most people thought his job was simple, but it was not. He had to understand how different species thought and felt. He also had to make sure their technology worked well together. His background in engineering helped a lot with the technical problems. The Velthari ship was beautiful and huge. It looked like a crystal palace floating in space. Jake had never seen anything like it before. The ship docked with smooth precision. That showed centuries of advanced technology. "They're here," Commander Singh said through the communication system. "All teams to positions." Jake adjusted his simple blue diplomatic uniform and walked to the docking bay. Dr. Parker was already there with her team of scientists and cultural experts. Everyone looked nervous but excited. This was the most important first contact in human history. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. The first person to step out was Ambassador Kethran, an older Velthari male with silver skin and eyes that seemed to glow. He moved with the grace of someone who had lived for hundreds of years. Behind him came a group of advisors and guards. Then Princess Zarathil appeared. Jake had seen pictures of her, but seeing her in person was different. She was tall and elegant with skin that shimmered like starlight. Her dark hair was arranged in complex braids that showed her royal status. She wore robes that seemed to float around her as she walked. Everything about her screamed nobility and power. She was also very young for her species. At 19, she was still considered almost a child by Velthari standards, but she carried herself like someone who had never been told no in her entire life. "Welcome to Haven's Rest," Dr. Parker said in carefully practiced Velthari. "We are honored by your presence." Ambassador Kethran nodded politely. "The honor is ours, Dr. Parker. May I present Her Royal Highness, Princess Zarathil, heir to the Crystal Throne." The princess said nothing. She looked around the docking bay with an expression that seemed both curious and slightly disappointed. Her eyes moved over the human delegation, studying each person carefully. "This is Jake Martinez," Dr. Parker continued. "He will be your cultural liaison during your stay." Jake stepped forward and gave a respectful bow. He had practiced this, greeting many times. "Your Highness, I am at your service." Princess Zarathil looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was hard to read. "You are the one who prepared our quarters?" "I supervised the environmental adjustments, yes," Jake replied. "I hope everything meets your needs." "We shall see," she said coldly. The next few hours went smoothly. Jake showed the Velthari delegation to their quarters and explained how the station worked. Princess Zarathil asked many questions about human technology. She seemed impressed by some things and dismissive of others. The formal dinner that evening was held in the station's main conference room. Representatives from 6 different species were there. The room was filled with the quiet sounds of translation devices and polite conversation. Jake sat at a side table with other junior staff members. His job was to watch and help if any problems came up. The princess sat at the head table with the senior diplomats and ambassadors. Everything was going well until Dr. Parker began introducing the human team to explain their backgrounds and experience. When she got to Jake, she mentioned that he was 28 and had started his career as an engineer before moving into diplomacy. The change in Princess Zarathil was immediate. Her face went from polite interest to shock, then to something that looked like anger. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through all other conversation. "Did you say this person is 28? Dr. Parker looked confused. "Yes, Your Highness. Jake is one of our most talented young diplomats." The princess stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on Jake across the room. "And his background is as a laborer?" "An engineer," Dr. Parker corrected gently. "He designed many of the systems that keep this station running." Princess Zarathiel's voice grew louder. Other conversations stopped as everyone turned to listen. "How dare these primitive, short-lived creatures assign a mere infant laborer to attend to royalty? Your species' arrogance knows no bounds when you send children to negotiate with your betters." The room went completely silent. Jake felt every eye in the room turn to him. Ambassador Kethran looked embarrassed. Dr. Parker's face went pale. Commander Singh's hand moved toward her weapon. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. Part of him wanted to stand up and explain himself. Part of him wanted to walk over and tell the princess exactly what he thought of her attitude. But he did neither of those things. Instead, Jake calmly set down his fork and knife. He placed his napkin on the table and stood up slowly. He gave a polite nod to Dr. Parker and another to Ambassador Kethran. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. He did not look at Princess Zarathiel. He did not say a single word. He simply walked away in complete silence. The door closed behind him with a soft whisper, leaving behind a room full of shocked diplomats and one very confused princess. 3 days after the environmental crisis, Princess Zarathiel made a decision that shocked everyone, including herself. She requested a formal assembly of all delegates currently on Haven's Rest Station. Ambassador Kethran tried to talk her out of it, but her mind was made up. The main conference hall filled with representatives from 6 different species. Humans, Velthari, Zentari, Kree, Andromedans, and others took their seats with curious expressions. This kind of general assembly was unusual, especially when called by someone so young. Princess Zarathiel stood at the center of the room, wearing her finest royal robes. But somehow, after working beside Jake in maintenance tunnels, the robes felt less important than they used to. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "I have called this assembly to address a serious error in judgment that I made." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Royalty did not usually admit to errors in public. "Several days ago, I insulted a member of the human delegation. I called Jake Martinez an infant laborer and questioned his qualifications to work with our delegation." Jake, who had been seated with the other junior staff, looked uncomfortable with the attention. He had not expected this public discussion of their conflict. "I made this insult based on assumptions about age and social status that are common in my culture, but wrong by any measure of actual worth." Princess Zarathiel paused, looking directly at Jake. "In the days since, I have observed Mr. Martinez's work and character. I have seen him solve complex problems with patience and skill. I have seen him risk his safety to protect others. Most importantly, I have had the privilege of working beside him during our recent crisis." The room was completely silent now. Even Ambassador Kethran looked surprised by the direction of her speech. Mr. Martinez could have demanded an apology from me. He could have refused to work with our delegation. He could have made this incident into a major diplomatic problem. Instead, he simply walked away with dignity intact and continued to do his job with professionalism. Princess Zarathiel's voice grew stronger. "I have learned that true nobility comes not from bloodline or age, but from actions and character. By this measure, Jake Martinez has shown more nobility than I have." She turned to address Jake directly. "Mr. Martinez, I apologize for my words and my assumptions. You deserved better treatment from someone who claims to represent a civilized species." Jake stood slowly. The entire room watched as he walked to the center where Princess Zarathiel waited. Your Highness, he said quietly, I accept your apology, and I appreciate your courage in offering it publicly. I also want to make a formal request, Princess Zarathil continued. I would like you to continue as cultural liaison to the Velthari. Delegation! If you are willing, Jake smiled. I would be honored, Your Highness. The room erupted in surprised murmurs and some scattered applause. Other delegates had never seen anything quite like this reversal. Captain Beth Collins stood up. If I may, Your Highness, this kind of mature leadership gives me great hope for future cooperation between our species. Over the following weeks, the relationship between Princess Zarathil and Jake became the foundation for a much stronger diplomatic agreement than anyone had expected. The princess proved to be an excellent student of human culture, while Jake gained valuable insights into Velthari long-term planning methods. More importantly, Princess Zarathil began implementing changes in how she thought about leadership and worth. She started asking more questions and making fewer assumptions. She listened to advice from people regardless of their age or background. When the formal treaty negotiations concluded successfully, Princess Zarathil made another announcement. She was requesting permission to establish a cultural exchange program between young Velthari and humans. We have much to learn from each other, she explained to the assembled delegates. Humans can teach us about innovation and individual initiative. We can teach them about patience and long-term consequences, but this learning must happen between equals, not between superior and inferior species. Jake was named as the first director of the exchange program. Dr. Parker published her research on interspecies cooperation, focusing on the importance of mutual respect over hierarchical relationships. 6 months later, Princess Zarathil returned to Haven's Rest as a fully accredited ambassador. The scared and arrogant teenager who had insulted Jake was gone, replaced by a confident young leader who had earned respect through her own actions. She found Jake in the same engineering section where she had first truly seen him work. He was training a group of young diplomats from various species on technical systems management. Am I interrupting? She asked from the doorway. Jake looked up and smiled. Never. How was your first month as ambassador? Challenging but rewarding. I discovered that leading through example is much more effective than leading through authority. Most humans figure that out eventually, Jake said, though some take longer than others. Princess Zarathil laughed. I suppose 19 years. Old is still young, even for humans. Young enough to keep learning, Jake agreed, but old enough to teach others what you've learned. They stood together looking out at the stars through the engineering section's main window. Ships from dozens of species moved peacefully through space around the station. I never thanked you properly, Princess Zarathil said quietly. For what? For walking away that night instead of fighting back. If you had argued with me or tried to defend yourself, I would have just gotten more angry and defensive. Your silence forced me to think about why you left. Jake considered this. I didn't plan it that way. I just knew that nothing good would come from an argument in that moment. That's what I mean. You understood something about conflict resolution that I had never learned. Sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. Sometimes, Jake agreed. Though speaking up is important too when the time is right. Like now? Princess Zarathil asked. Like now, she turned to face him fully. Jake Martinez, would you be interested in joining the cultural exchange program as a permanent advisor? We need someone who understands both species and can help build real cooperation. Jake's face lit up. I thought you'd never ask. As they shook hands on the agreement, Princess Zarathil reflected on how much had changed since that disastrous dinner. She had learned that respect could not be demanded, only earned. She had discovered that wisdom came from experience, not just age. Most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the best teachers were the ones who taught through example rather than words. The cultural exchange program would go on to become one of the most successful interspecies cooperation efforts in galactic history. But it all started with a young woman learning to see past her assumptions and a young man who knew when to walk away and when to stay and help. In the end, the greatest diplomatic victory was not a treaty or trade agreement, but two people from different worlds learning to understand and respect each other as equals. The emergency alarms started screaming at 3 in the morning. Princess Zarathil woke instantly, her training kicking in despite her confusion. Through her quarters communication system, she heard Commander Singh's voice, cutting through the noise. All hands to emergency stations. We have multiple system failures in the environmental controls. This is not a drill. Princess Zarathil quickly dressed and hurried to the main corridor. Other delegates were emerging from their quarters, looking confused and worried. The station's lighting had switched to emergency power, casting everything in a red glow. She found Ambassador Kethron near the command center. "What is happening?" she asked. "The main environmental processors are failing," he replied grimly. "Air recycling, water purification, waste management, temperature control, everything is shutting down." Through the command center's windows, Princess Zarathil could see humans and aliens working frantically at control stations. In the center of it all was Jake Martinez, his uniform already dirty from crawling through maintenance areas. "How bad is it?" Dr. Parker asked, rushing up to join them. Commander Singh's face was grim. "Bad. We have maybe 30 hours of emergency life support for the full station population. After that, we'll have to start evacuating. Evacuating 3,000 people will take days," Ambassador Kethron said quietly. "Many will not survive." Princess Zarathil watched Jake as he studied readouts and gave orders to his engineering team. Even in crisis, he moved with the same calm efficiency she had observed before. "What caused the failures?" Dr. Parker asked. "Cascade failure in the primary control systems," Jake called out from across the room. "Someone tried to upgrade the software remotely, but it had bugs. The bad code corrupted everything. Can you fix it?" Commander Singh asked. Jake paused for a moment, studying the displays. "Maybe, but I'll need help. This isn't a one-person job." "Whatever you need," Singh replied. Jake looked around the room, his eyes stopping on Princess Zarathil. "I need people who understand complex systems and can work under pressure. Your Highness, do you have technical training?" Princess Zarathil was surprised by the question. "Yes, I studied advanced systems management as part of my royal education." "Good, I could use your help." Ambassador Kethran looked shocked. "Your Highness, surely this is not appropriate work for someone of your station." Princess Zarathil looked at Jake, then at the desperate faces around her. Thousands of lives were at stake. Her royal status would mean nothing if everyone died. Because she was too proud to help. "I will assist," she said firmly. For the next 30 hours, Princess Zarathil worked beside Jake in ways she had never imagined possible. They crawled through maintenance tunnels together, rewired control circuits, and tested system after system. Jake never treated her like royalty during the crisis. He treated her like a competent technician, which somehow felt more respectful than any formal bow. When she made suggestions, he listened carefully. When she made mistakes, he corrected them patiently without making her feel stupid. "Hand me that plasma coupler," Jake said during hour 15. They were wedged into a space barely large enough for two people, working on a critical junction. Princess Zarathil passed him the tool, their hands touching briefly. "Will this fix the recycling system?" "This fixes one part of it. We still have about 40 more connections to repair." "How do you stay so calm?" she asked. "People might die if we fail." Jake paused in his work and looked at her. "Panicking won't help them. Good work will. So I focus on the work." Princess Zarathil realized this was the first real conversation they had ever had. "Is this how humans always handle crisis?" "Not all humans," Jake replied, returning to his repairs. "But it's how I learned to handle them. When my parents died, I had to choose between falling apart and figuring out how to survive. Falling apart doesn't solve problems. I am sorry about your parents, Princess Zarathiel said quietly. Thank you. It was a long time ago. Jake finished the connection and moved to the next one. What about you? How do the Velthari usually handle emergencies? Usually someone in authority decides what to do, and everyone else follows orders. That can work, Jake said thoughtfully. But sometimes the person with authority isn't the person who best understands the problem. During Hour 22, they made a breakthrough. Princess Zarathiel spotted a pattern in the system failures that Jake had missed. Look at these timestamps, she said, pointing to the diagnostic display. The failures aren't random. They're following the original upgrade sequence. Jake studied the data and his eyes widened. You're right. If we can reverse the sequence, we might be able to restore everything at once instead of fixing each system separately. Working together, they developed a plan to roll back the entire system to its pre-upgrade state. It was risky. If they made a mistake, they could lose what little life support remained. But it was also their best chance to save everyone. Are you sure about this? Commander Singh asked when they presented the plan. Jake looked at Princess Zarathiel. We're sure, but it has to be done perfectly. The rollback took 4 hours. Princess Zarathiel and Jake worked in perfect coordination, each handling different parts of the complex process. She found herself anticipating his needs and thinking ahead to potential problems. When the main environmental systems finally came back online, the entire command center erupted in cheers. People hugged each other and cried with relief. Princess Zarathiel felt exhausted, but also strangely proud. Jake turned to her with a tired smile. Thank you, Your Highness. I couldn't have done this without you. Princess Zarathiel looked at her dirty hands and ruined robes. A week ago, she would have been horrified by her appearance. Now she felt only satisfaction at work well done. Thanka. You for letting me help? She replied. I learned more about real problem-solving in 30 hours than I did in years of royal education. You're a natural at systems work, Jake said. Your people's long-term thinking really helped with the complex sequences. As the immediate crisis passed and normal operations resumed, Princess Zarathiel realized something important had changed. She had spent her whole life being told she was special because of her birth and status. But working with Jake, she had felt special for the first time because of what she could do. Jake, she said as they cleaned up their tools, I owe you an apology. Jake looked surprised. For what? For what I said at the dinner. You are not an infant laborer. You are one of the most competent people I have ever met. Jake smiled gently. Thank you, Your Highness. But you don't owe me anything. We all make mistakes when we don't understand each other's cultures. But I should have tried to understand before making judgments. Maybe, Jake agreed. But understanding often comes from working together, like we just did. Words alone aren't always enough. Princess Zarathiel nodded thoughtfully. In 30 hours of crisis, she had learned more about humans and about herself than in all her previous years of education. And she had learned it not through lectures or books, but through shared effort toward a common goal. Princess Zarathiel could not sleep. For 3 days now, she had been thinking about the human who walked away from her insult. In her world, such behavior was unthinkable. People either fought back when insulted or they apologized and tried to make things right. They did not simply leave in silence. She found herself watching Jake from a distance whenever possible. The station had many observation areas and public spaces where she could see him work without being noticed. What she saw confused her even more. Jake moved through the station like someone who belonged there. Other humans greeted him with genuine warmth. Alien representatives sought him out for help with technical problems. He never seemed rushed or angry, even when dealing with difficult situations. On the 4th day, Princess Zarathiel witnessed something that made her question everything she thought she knew about the human. 2 alien species, the Zentari and the Kree, had gotten into an argument about water usage in their quarters. Both species needed large amounts of water, but their purification requirements were different. The argument had been going on for hours and was getting louder. Princess Zarathil watched from an upper observation deck as Jake approached the two groups. He did not announce himself or demand attention. He simply walked up and listened to both sides explain their problems. "The Zentari are using all the clean water," the Kree representative said angrily. "Our young will die without proper hydration. Our water must be heated to specific temperatures," the Zentari replied. "The purification process takes time. We cannot rush it." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "How much water does each group need per day?" Both sides gave him numbers. Jake asked more questions about temperature requirements, purification methods, and timing needs. He never raised his voice or took sides. After 20 minutes of questions, Jake said, "I think I can solve this. Give me 2 hours." Princess Zarathil followed him as he went to the engineering section. She watched through a window as he worked at computer terminals and drew diagrams. He made several communication calls and checked supply lists. 2 hours later, Jake returned to the arguing groups with a solution. He had found a way to split the purification system so each species could have their own dedicated water supply. The modification would take 1 day to complete, and both groups would have exactly what they needed. The Zentari and Kree representatives looked amazed. They had been fighting for hours about a problem that Jake solved in minutes. "How did you think of this so quickly?" the Zentari asked. Jake smiled. "I listened to what you both actually needed instead of focusing on what you were fighting about." As the groups thanked Jake and went back to their quarters, Princess Zarathil realized something important. In her culture, problems were solved through authority and commands. Someone with higher status would decide who was right and who was wrong. But Jake had solved the problem by understanding it rather than judging it. That evening, Princess Zarathil decided to learn more about Jake's background. She asked Ambassador Kethran to access human records about Jake's life and work. What she learned surprised her. Jake had not just worked 3 jobs while studying. He had also volunteered at hospitals and helped build homes for poor families. After becoming an engineer, he had designed water purification systems for refugee camps and emergency shelters. "He chooses to help people who cannot pay him?" Princess Zarathil asked. "It appears so, Your Highness," Ambassador Kethran replied. "Humans call this charity or volunteer work. But why would someone spend time helping strangers when they could be improving their own status? Perhaps they believe that helping others does improve their status, just not in ways we measure." Princess Zarathil thought about this. In Velthari society, status came from bloodline, age, and accumulated wealth. The idea that someone could gain respect by giving things away was completely foreign to her. The next day brought another revelation. Princess Zarathil was walking through the station's technical areas when she heard voices coming from the main engineering room. She looked through the doorway and saw Jake working with 3 other humans on some kind of problem. The atmospheric processors in Section 7 are running hot, one of the humans said. "If they fail, we'll lose life support for 200 people. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "Maybe 6 hours before critical failure." Princess Zarathil watched as Jake immediately began working on the problem. He did not ask who was in danger or which species they belonged to. He did not check whether fixing the problem was his responsibility. He just started working. For the next 5 hours, Jake and his team worked without stopping. Princess Zarathil found herself unable to leave. She watched as Jake crawled through maintenance tunnels, rewired control systems, and tested new configurations. During one particularly difficult moment, Jake was working in a tunnel so small he could barely move. Toxic gas was leaking from a damaged processor, making the air dangerous to breathe. The other humans wanted to wait for safety equipment, but Jake shook his head. "People are depending on this system," he said. "I can fix it if I work fast." He disappeared into the tunnel with a small breathing mask and basic tools. Princess Zarathil held her breath as she watched the minutes pass. Finally, Jake emerged, covered in grease and looking exhausted but smiling. "Got it," he said simply. "System should hold now." The other humans cheered and patted Jake on the back. Princess Zarathil realized that this human, who she had called an infant laborer, had just risked his life to save people he had never met. That night, Princess Zarathil could not stop thinking about what she had seen. She had grown up believing that important people did not dirty their hands with physical work. Important people gave orders and others followed them. But Jake was important to everyone on the station, and he was important precisely because he was willing to dirty his hands. People respected him not because of his age or birth, but because of what he did for others. "Ambassador Kethran," she said finally, "I think I may have made an error in judgment." The old ambassador looked at her carefully. "What kind of error? Your Highness? I assumed that young meant worthless, and that working with your hands meant low status. But this human has proven me wrong on both counts. What do you plan to do about this realization?" Princess Zarathil stared out at the stars, again. For the first time in her life, she was not sure what the right answer was. All her training told her that admitting error to a lower status person would weaken her position. But everything she had learned about humans suggested they might see such admission as strength rather than weakness. "I need to understand more about human culture," she said finally. "And I think I need to understand more about Jake Martinez." Ambassador Kethran smiled. "I believe that would be wise, Your Highness." Dr. Lisa Parker stared at the closed door where Jake had disappeared. The silence in the dining room felt heavy and uncomfortable. She had been doing diplomatic work for 15 years, but she had never seen anything quite like this. Princess Zarathil still stood at the head table. She looked around the room as if waiting for something to happen. Her face showed confusion mixed with anger. Ambassador Kethran whispered something to her in their own language, but she waved him away. "Well," said Captain Beth Collins, the senior human diplomat, "I think we should continue with dinner." Her voice was calm, but everyone could hear the tension underneath. The other alien representatives began talking again, but their conversations were quieter now. They kept glancing toward the princess, and then toward the empty spot where Jake had been sitting. Dr. Parker stood up and walked over to the Velthari table. "Your Highness," she said carefully, "perhaps we could discuss this matter privately." Princess Zarathil sat down slowly. "There is nothing to discuss. The human showed proper respect by leaving. I expect he will return tomorrow with an apology." Ambassador Kethran looked uncomfortable. "Your Highness, perhaps we should learn more about human customs before—" "I know enough," the princess interrupted. "Inferior species must show respect to their betters. This is the natural order." Dr. Parker felt her jaw clench, but she kept her voice level. "With respect, Your Highness, humans do not share that view of natural order." The princess looked surprised. "Then how do you organize your society? How do you know who should lead?" "We have many ways," Dr. Parker replied. "But we generally believe that worth comes from actions, not from birth." Princess Zarathil laughed, but it was not a kind sound. "Actions? That infant has barely been alive long enough to have any meaningful actions. In my species, he would still be learning basic concepts." The dinner continued, but the mood was spoiled. Representatives from other species made polite conversation, but everyone was thinking about what had happened. When the evening finally ended, Dr. Parker walked quickly to find Jake. She found him in the engineering section, working on some maintenance reports. He looked up when she entered, but his expression was neutral. "Jake, I'm so sorry about what happened," Dr. Parker began. "It's not your fault," Jake replied quietly. "And it's not really her fault either. She was raised to think that way." Dr. Parker sat down across from him. The other delegates are talking. They've never seen anyone respond to an insult like that before. How do they usually respond? Jake asked. Most species either fight back or submit. You did neither. You just left with dignity intact. Jake shrugged. Fighting would have made things worse. Submitting would have been dishonest. Leaving seemed like the best option. Commander Maya Singh appeared in the doorway. Jake, there are 3 different ambassadors asking to meet with you. Word is spreading about what happened. What kind of word? Dr. Parker asked. Good word, Singh replied. The Zentari ambassador said he's impressed by human emotional control. The Kree representative wants to know if all humans respond to conflict this way. Jake looked surprised. They're interested in how I handled it? Very interested. The princess expected you to come back and beg for forgiveness. When you didn't show up this morning, she sent Ambassador Kethron to ask where you were. Dr. Parker leaned forward. What did you tell them? That you were doing your regular duties. Jake, you have 3 different species requesting you as their cultural liaison now. Over the next few days, Jake continued his work but avoided any contact with Princess Zarathil. He helped the Zentari delegation set up their communication systems. He solved a food preparation problem for the Kree. He designed new air filters for the Andromedan quarters. Every time he worked with another species, they asked him about the incident with the princess. Jake always gave the same quiet answer. We have different ways of handling disagreement. Princess Zarathil, meanwhile, grew more frustrated each day. She had expected Jake to apologize by now. In her experience, lower-status individuals always came back to make things right when they offended someone important. Why has he not returned? She asked Ambassador Kethran for the 4th time. Perhaps, Your Highness. He sees no reason to. Return, the ambassador replied carefully. No reason. I am royalty. He insulted me by leaving. With respect, Your Highness, you insulted him first. Princess Zarathil looked shocked. I stated facts. He is young and lowborn. These are not insults, but truths. Ambassador Kethron sighed. I have been studying human culture, Your Highness. They do not see age and birth the same way we do. Then how do they see them? Age brings experience, but youth can bring new ideas. Birth may give advantages, but they respect people who work hard to improve themselves. The princess frowned. That makes no sense. How can someone with only 28 years of life have anything valuable to offer? Dr. Parker had been listening to this conversation through the translation device. She decided it was time to help the princess understand something important about Jake. Your Highness, she said, stepping into the conversation. May I tell you about Jake's 28 years? Princess Zarathil looked annoyed, but nodded. Jake's parents died in a mining accident when he was 16. He had no family money and no connections. He worked 3 jobs while going to school. He studied engineering during the day and worked in factories at night. It took him 8 years to finish. What most humans do in 4. The princess listened, but her expression remained skeptical. After graduation, he volunteered for the most dangerous first contact missions. He has designed life support systems for 7 different alien species. The air you are breathing right now was filtered through systems he created. The water in your quarters was purified by his work. Dr. Parker paused to let this sink in. He asked specifically to work with your delegation because he wanted to learn from a species with long lifespans. He thought the Velthari could teach humans about patience and long-term thinking. Princess Zarathil was quiet for a long moment. He wanted to learn from us? Yes. And when you called him an infant laborer, you were insulting someone who has spent his entire adult life trying to understand and help other species. Ambassador Kethron nodded slowly. Your Highness, perhaps this explains why he did not return to apologize. But surely he understands that I am his superior, the princess said, though she sounded less certain now. Dr. Parker shook her head. Humans don't believe anyone is automatically superior to anyone else. Respect must be earned through actions. Princess Zarathiel stared out the window at the stars for a long time. For the first time since arriving at the station, she looked uncertain about something.